This year's Cleveland Browns team has a ton of excitement behind it, and with excitement comes expectations. And I think there are certain players on this roster that have a lot to prove and a lot to show. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. These are guys whose 2021 seasons are going to have a little extra oomph in it when it comes to what they can get if they can have a big season. Who are those guys? Well, we're going to talk about it right after I give a shout out to the patreon.com Dog Check tier members. I'm going to start with Fred Pratt III, David Valtier, Relentless Buck Chunt, Rex Kaufman, The Real Quincy Carrier, Kevin Johnson, Marino V, Cleveland Cart, Matt H, Sign Sheets, Gemini, Fight Dirty 74, Yo-Yo, Matt Lloyd, Paul Wilcox, Hundo Magnifico, Rob Ferron, Kyle Stouffer, Lukey from Munich, Dave Roth, J Guy 101, Joe Bobby, Brad Calbo, Dylan W, James McGinley, Arenda Hall, Chad Gimme, David Maldonado, Dylan Hale, Josh Bendor, Mark M, TJ Showman, Stuart Moore, Cleveland BCI, Robert Jermaine Jr., Dave Mike May, John Cummings, Andrew Hirsch, Curtis Bear, Brock Kumar, John Albert, Masayua, Buds Roland, James Nemo, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Philip Wilcoxon, Marie Vivert, Sean Barron, Goggles Pisano, Corporal Nick Lopez, Dom Gazzulo, Nick Nasty, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216, Anthony Latham, Christian, Dave Strong, Matt Stone, Charles Work, Billy Moose Gentry, Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, Dog Pound Kai, Greg Ehlers, Austin Bolin, Kirkabar, Lydia Mahawk, Jesus Serrano, Chris Phones, Picktown Browns backers, Mark Kahn, Max Owl Dojo, and Water Bear Marketing. Again, guys, thank you so much for the support. It means a ton that you guys stick with me throughout the off season and the regular season. Again, guys, thank you so much. Now, let's talk about three players who have a lot to prove in 2021 on the Cleveland Browns. Now, the first guy I'm going to have on this list is probably the most obvious guy, the guy who is literally on a prove-it deal on this team. That's going to be Jadeveon Clowney. Look, he has been dominant in years past. He has been a very good player, but he's never been a player whose numbers are going to jump off a stat sheet, and sometimes that's hindered his ability to command the type of money that a player of his caliber can get in the free agency market on top of his injuries. Now that he's coming to the Cleveland Browns and there's going to be multiple things available to him that have not been available to him in most of his stops when it comes to help on the defensive line, when it comes to secondary support, when it comes to a lot of things with the 2021 Browns that he's going to have on defense that he's never had. It means that a lot of the reasons for why Clowney hasn't had the sack production, or the reasons that Clowney hasn't been able to stay healthy, are kind of gone. Now, the health thing, that's his own thing to prove, but when it comes to the production, the numbers, that's another thing. And with Clowney working opposite of a guy like Myles Garrett, I think people are going to expect that Clowney should be able to get more sacks, or at least finish more often, or at least have an insane amount of pressure numbers. Either way, people are either expecting Jadeveon Clowney to take a step and really put himself back into that conversation of dominant defensive players, or they're expecting him to fizzle out. This year, there's really no good excuse for him not to be productive this year outside of injury. And if he gets injured again after having to take a prove-it deal after being injured last year, it's going to be something that's going to affect his ability to just stay in the league, period. But if he does stay healthy and he does have a good year, it will mean a lot for him when it comes to his future earnings. Or if he stays healthy and he doesn't produce, it will mean a lot for him in a negative way when it comes to his future earnings. Either way, 2021 for Jadeveon Clowney is going to be huge, because this is the first time he's had real support when it comes to a pass rusher who's going to command attention, real support when it comes to other defensive line players, and real support when it comes to the secondary playing behind him. This all looks like a great situation for Jadeveon Clowney, and I think people are going to want to see him produce like we expect Jadeveon Clowney to produce. So I think he's one of the guys who has the most to prove this season. Another guy who I think is pretty obvious that has a ton to prove is Odell Beckham Jr. Look, he has not had a Odell Beckham Jr. type season since he has been traded to the Cleveland Browns. And some people are starting to wonder if he's aged out. He's coming back from an ACL injury. And, you know, people are just right now getting real bold about their talk about Odell. You have people in this fan base pondering whether the Browns are a better team without him. You have people outside wondering if he is still, in fact, Odell Beckham Jr. You know, a lot of questions about Odell and the type of player he is and the type of statuses that he's going to carry. Also, what puts a little bit more pressure on Odell was the fact that Baker Mayfield proved last year that he was a top 10 quarterback. So now that crutch of an excuse that some people used for Odell when it came to the 2019 campaign, where they complained about the quarterback play not being up to par, is not really going to be one that a lot of people are going to buy as quickly, because a lot of people last year saw Baker Mayfield play really well. So if Baker is still playing well, or the offense is still moving along quite well, and Odell is still not producing, a lot of people are going to start to look at Odell sideways. Also, let's face it, he's coming off an ACL injury. He is creeping towards 30 years old, and he's a player who's always kind of utilized his athleticism more to get open than anything else, even though he's a tremendous route runner and everything else. It's a more dire situation for Odell Beckham, and it's one where he kind of has to prove this year that he's still Odell Beckham, or else people are going to start to write him off. In the NFL, especially for a wide receiver, it only takes 2 or 3 bad years for people to just throw you away or write you off and say that you're not going to be good again. I mean, Chad Johnson's career ended very quickly like that. Terrell Owens' career ended very quickly like that. You can name a ton of receivers who, after having a great year, 2 or 3 years after that, when they had down years, they suddenly found themselves being traded around, bounced around, and not carrying the same status that they did as a star wide receiver. Odell Beckham is in that same kind of crossroads. But I will put this in here for Odell. I don't necessarily think for him to prove that he's still Odell, it's going to come up to statistical numbers, right? Where he needs X amount of yards, touchdowns, and receptions or anything like that. I think it's just going to come down to just what you can see on the field, his ability to be really productive for this offense in the way that you would expect. I don't know what that's going to look number-wise, because this team is really balanced when it comes to the run and pass attack. And when you have a rushing attack that has Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and you have Odell and Jarvis, you're going to have a balanced passing attack. So that's going to lead to lesser numbers for the wide receivers. So I'm not necessarily going to live or die with that. But for Odell Beckham, what's going to be more important are probably the touchdown numbers, the catches, right? Is he still able to make those acrobatic catches, and the speed, right? I mean, we're not going to expect Odell to get like a bunch of, 70 plus yard touchdowns, but you would like to see 1 or 2 this season where he still shows that he has that kind of burst that could take the top off of defense, because it's a big part of what Odell brings to the offense in Cleveland, especially just in his game in general. So that's why Odell is somebody who has a ton to play for this season. And then the last guy I'm going to talk about, and I think this is going to be received kind of mixed by the people who watch this video, is Baker Mayfield. Now, I'm not saying this in a traditional way where people are putting Baker under the microscope and asking, is he good enough for this team to win? I obviously have answered that, right? I have said Baker Mayfield is clearly good enough to win with. But for Baker Mayfield, and what it seems like the scrutiny that he deals with because he was taken number 1 overall in the 2018 draft, this is an opportunity to show everybody where you belong, right? Because when you talk about Baker Mayfield amongst football fans, analysts, and everybody else in between, there's a mixed opinion on where Baker sits on that. Some people think Baker's top 10. Some people think he's top 5. Some people think he's top 15. Some people think he's Andy Dalton. Some people think he's Kirk Cousins. There's a wide spectrum of where people believe Baker Mayfield's level of play is. And this is an opportunity for Baker Mayfield, at least this year, to kind of show everybody exactly where he belongs. And I touched on this in a video I did the other day about the Browns roster. And the thing for Baker and why it's hard for him to establish himself amongst the NFL's top 10 or elite or whatever you want to put him at, versus guys like, Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, is that Baker's skill set isn't immediately identifiable, right? When you look at Josh Allen, it's obvious what the skill set is there and what he brings to the table. You watch 1 or 2 plays of the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's obvious that Patrick Mahomes has an arm that is unworldly, like freakishly talented from that standpoint. And Lamar Jackson, it really don't take much for you to understand why Lamar Jackson is insanely talented. With Baker Mayfield, it's a bit more of a puzzle to figure out, right? If you just look at him, he's only 6 foot. He's like 225 pounds. He's not a small quarterback, right? But he's not a big guy. He's not a small guy, but he's not a big guy. He's not the fastest guy, but he's not slow. He runs like the same 40, I think, that Patrick Mahomes does, a 4.8 one. And even with his arm strength, because he does have tremendous arm strength, he's not really in an offense that's going to have him, throwing deep all the time. Like usually it's going to be off a play action bootleg and he's going to have time to gather and throw. It's not like he has to throw off platform and really chuck it a ton. Even though he's shown that he can do that, it's not something that's like super obvious when you watch him. It takes a while of watching Baker Mayfield to notice how talented he is. So for him, when it comes to establishing himself as a top 10 quarterback, just the very nature of his game, it's going to be hard to convince people or show people that he belongs in the top level quarterback conversation, where people aren't talking about switching him out for X or Z quarterback. So for Baker Mayfield this year, having the defense, having the offense, second year with Kevin Stefanski, this is the time to put up some undeniable numbers, some undeniable stats, and some undeniable performances so people can start to understand what people who have watched Baker for a little while have understood in Cleveland for a while. So this is a huge opportunity for Baker Mayfield, right? It also is going to dictate what the terms of his contract is going to be, because if he wants to be paid like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are going to be paid either this or next offseason, then he has to get himself in an MVP conversation this season in order to get that. And for Baker, it's going to take some eye-popping numbers and performances to be able to do that because of everything that I described before. But those are my three guys this year who I think have the most to prove this season: Baker Mayfield, Jadeveon Clowney, and Odell Beckham Jr. Let me know your three guys who have the most to prove this season and why down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.